Hi, I'm Greeshma Kuthar, and you're listening to episode 12 of Mission Manipur, a frontline podcast that looks in detail at the Manipur conflict. This episode is titled The People's Tribunal on the Ethnic Conflict in Manipur. In my last episode, I did mention that I'm going to try and speak to jury members of the Independent People's Tribunal that was put together by the People's Union of Civil Liberties, which is the PUCL. The report was released last month and has been discussed across the country. But I also do think that hearing from the jury who traveled across Manipur and also deliberated on the issue for months together before releasing the report is important. So I'm really glad that former Patna High Court Judge Justice Anjana Prakash and Dr. Navsharan Singh, who's a writer, researcher, and activist, have agreed to speak to me about this report. Thank you so much, Justice Anjana and Dr. Navsharan, for joining me today.
Thank you.
As a journalist who's been reporting on this from the time that the violence started, I've always, right from the beginning, felt that there's not enough discussions on this. Initially, till the viral video came out, there was very less reportage on it. And after the video came out, though there was a slight spark in discussions, it felt like it wasn't sufficient and it ended too quickly. And after that, from then till now, it's just been discussions which have never really focused on what is happening in Manipur. It was some kind of sensationalism once in a while. Basically, all of it was sort of very less compared to the scale of the violence and also the importance of discussing what went on in Manipur. So I'm really, really glad that this report is out and it is so in depth and so in detail. And I hope one of the reasons why I thought we should do this episode is because people also feel more accessible to the report by listening to you all, speak about it. And also, urging people to read this. So, just to kind of give a brief idea of how I want to go over this report, I want to start with sort of understanding why is it that this tribunal thought you all should do this report. And then we can go into findings of the report and the tribunal and also the solution. So this is how I've structured this conversation. To begin with, the report itself is extremely in depth. There are 12 chapters. And the first three chapters kind of set context to the issue, to Manipur, and also to why is it that you all decided, this is something that we have to do. This is a question I think that I would like to hear from both of you because both of you might have had different reasons when you joined the tribunal as to really, really understand, really, really understanding the issue, but also like, why is it that so many people had to come together to do this? So maybe Dr. Navsharan, you can start and then we can go to Justice Anjana. Can you please tell me what is it that you felt from the time that you heard about this violence? And eventually, when you joined the tribunal, what was going in your head about the intentions of this tribunal?
Sure, Grishma, thank you. Thanks for having us here and giving us an opportunity to talk about the report. I think ever since the violence in Manipur broke out, the brutalization, the state failure, and human tragedy, it was mounting. But at the same time, opinions were polarized. And the democratic rights movement people, concerned citizens, were feeling disappointed in their own inability to contribute to understanding or to lend a voice of solidarity or do anything. So when that horrific video surfaced on 19th July 2023 of two women being paraded naked on a road by a group of men, and which had happened on 4th May, actually, the collective conscience of the countries was lacerated and led to many things. And this country has a tradition of actually fact findings and also independent solidarity missions to conflict or to areas which are subjected to violence, etc. So when this video came out, and actually even before that, there were a number of statements issued by democratic rights organizations, women's rights organizations. Even PUCL also issued a statement. And there was we were seeing at the same time that there were quite a few actually people, peace activists, women's rights, democratic rights people tried to go to Manipur. And I can recall it was National Federation of Women, which with Annie Raja, who went in June. And when they came back, they did a press conference whereby they said that the violence was state abetted and state was deeply implicated in that. And then Harsh Mandar Karwai Mohabbat also went on a mission and visited people in the camps, etc. Again, I think in June and July. But what happened when Annie and the people came back, there was an FIR slapped on them of sedition. And it was said that all these people who are going from mainland India to Manipur are actually flaring up the violence. So in some sense, such solidarity visits were being criminalized and the tragedy was being weaponized. That's what the state, we thought, was doing. And the violence remained unabated. So 10 months later, I think PUCL, I'm not part of PUCL, but I follow PUCL. PUCL also was feeling that something should be done. Fact-finding was by that time too late. 10 months into the conflict was too late. So they decided to put together a People's Tribunal, an all India tribunal with members of jury coming from senior advocates, judges, eminent scholars, journalists, and that's actually an all India, a self-financed group of people were approached by PUCL 10 months into the conflict, and they came together to form the Independent People's Tribunal to go to Manipur with a very clear terms of reference, which said that the Manipur, the tribunal, the independent tribunal will be independent. It will constitute of people who had not been on any other fact-finding or solidarity mission also. And it was independent tribunal which was all India, had an all India character. So the terms of reference included that the tribunal will document the violations suffered by the people of Manipur, with specific attention to loss of life, sexual violence, and violence suffered by children, including pregnant women and the elderly. The tribunal also wanted to examine and analyze the performance and responsibility of the constitutional authorities and what efforts were they making to establish rule of law. The third thing which was to be explored was to examine the role of all security agencies, because as we know, there's a heavy presence of security agencies in the state, and yet the violence was unabated. So the tribunal's terms of reference also included examining the role of security agencies as well as government functionaries at all levels of the state and central government as well, in ensuring that law and order is maintained. Another thing was to examine existing documentation which had happened on Manipur situation and analyze the reasons for continuing violence. And by that time, as I said earlier, there were a few reports already circulating on the situation in Manipur, which were based on fact-finding or solidarity missions. And finally, the independent tribunal were to make recommendations to repair the torn social economic, cultural, and political fabric of the state. So this is what largely the framework under which the Independent People's Tribunal of 14 member was constituted, comprising of 3 judges, one from the Supreme Court, retired, and 2 from the High Courts of India, different cases. Yes, and then there were other people, academics, activists, human rights defenders who participated. Some of the members from out of this 14 member jury actually spent about 2 weeks in Manipur between May and June of 2024, and visited disturbed areas, talked to a range of people, and while they were doing that, in those days that we spent in Manipur, not everyone could be met. There were other people who wanted to come and depose before the jury. So when we came back, there were online meetings which continued, where people deposed. And there was also a 3-day tribunal which was held in Delhi. So this, although the visit ended in early June, the testimonies continued to be made till about September of 2024. And while we were there, we visited Churachandpur, Imphal, Kankopi, Saikul, Moirang, Bishnupur, Khwatka, Kakching, and we visited 7 camps actually. 2 Kuki, 5 Maiti camps were also visited by the team, and about 200 testimonies were collected. Now, I also want to take 1 minute to talk about these testimonies. The testimonies were made to the members of the jury in all these cities that I mentioned, or districts, where they came, they deposed, and what they said was recorded, and they signed, they agreed that what they were saying was based on what they experienced. They gave us photographs, they gave us large number of documents to support what they were saying, because this is something which the jury had requested, that people who come, they come and talk about their experience, but also bring the trail which they, paper trail or videos or photographs, etc. So approximately 200 testimonies, out of which about 100 are of the Kuki-Zo people, about 80 from the Maiti community. There were 2 meetings with Naga groups. There were 4 or 5 meetings with senior state officials. There were non-Manipur experts who were, including journalists and academics, who were also interviewed or who deposed. And there was also 1 meeting with Pangals community. So the 700 pages report that was released late last month sums up this process which was followed, and we tried to, the effort was towards finding the truth, which is very complex. And we still, as in the report, and we say with full responsibility that what we wrote is based on what we heard, what we triangulated, what we saw from other reports, and tried to be unbiased as much as we could. Thanks.
Thank you, Navsharan. Justice Anjana, just before we go into the next section, I just wanted to ask you a related question. How is it that you viewed this process, but also along with the intentions, What did you think this tribunal's findings should communicate to India?
First of all, I must tell you why I personally committed myself to this fact-finding commission. Not really fact-finding, this tribunal. What had happened was that what I noticed was even so many months after the pass of so many months, what you could see was a complete apathy of the state and the central government to the horrors that were being inflicted day in and day out on the Manipuris. And what was really shocking was that the rest of India was just not engaged, was not engaging in what was happening in Manipur, as though it was a different country altogether. It didn't concern them. So that was, the apathy. That was very disturbing to me. And that is why, I committed myself to be part of this tribunal. Unfortunately, for health reasons, I couldn't go to Manipur personally. But when the depositions were being recorded, I was very much present here and part of the group which was recording the depositions. And at that point in time, I realized, I thank myself for having joined the tribunal, because I realized, it was so important for people to be heard. That was one thing that was not happening. The Manipuris were not being heard. So, and they had been displaced, they were staying in Delhi, and nobody was listening to them. And the horrors that the tales of horrors that they told us, it was not this community or that community. All communities were victims in this case. And they came and they told us stories, the trauma that they had suffered. So even the fact that we listened to them, they thanked us for that. So you can imagine, the way people were being blocked into their cells for and not being heard. I mean, that was what was very distressing, and that is what I thought that we must do. So we listened to them, and even hearing them, whether or not we could find any solutions. Now, we've suggested a lot of suggestions, and we've recommended a lot of ways in which we can move forward. But the point is, only if the government and the people are willing. Nothing can happen, in the absence of the people's willingness to bring peace back to Manipur, and that's what's important.
From the time that I've been in college and a lawyer and then a journalist, which is, I don't know, 15 years, I feel like every time something, either caste violence or ethnic violence or any kind of violence happens in India, like Dr. Navsharan said, there would be attempts to do fact-finding missions. There would be reports that would come out and they would be received in a certain way. And discussions would be where people would be divided, but there would be a certain kind of authentic discussion that would happen. But in all these years, in more than 15 years that I have seen, this is the first time that I'm seeing a report not being sort of, received in a way that so much effort, there are so many people in this, there's so much effort that's gone into this, but to dismiss it in one go, like as if we all, I mean, what is it that people can have other than coming together and furthering the cause of, hearing people, that a report like this can have? So for me also, it's been a very difficult process to even get people to engage on the report, like, like they would engage with any other report. So to go into this report, I feel like the first thing that we need to discuss is this, the constitutional status of this whole chapter on how it is that Manipur and this constitutional status of ST itself was one of the reasons that people said that this violence started, right? That has been extensively discussed in chapter 3. So this was sort of presented as the trigger, but as the report says, and as many findings have said, that is probably like trivializing, the whole cause behind the violence, because there's so much more to the violence. So if one of you can take this question, like what chapter 3 goes so much into, can the status of scheduled tribe itself, is it something that, and since it's sparked off from order of the High Court, recommending for it, and finally the Supreme Court goes back and sort of resigns that portion. Justice Anjana, maybe you can tell us a little bit about.
Greeshma,
Yeah.
since you're a lawyer, it'll be easy for you to understand that actually the order was so innocuous. The High Court order was so innocuous. It only said, that the state government is directed to or something requested the matter is disposed of.
Recommending, yeah.
That to consider the grievance or whatever. The point is, these kind of innocuous orders are passed day in and day out by the high courts and nothing happens on it. But I think, it was used more as a trigger for something that has already taken place. Foundations had been laid. That, of course, we could also see, it was not a one-off violence. And if it was a one-off violence, it would have ended right there and then. But it didn't end. You see, it continued for months together, which means that it was not something which was going to be eradicated or stopped just, by the order of the High Court. It was not like that. People had invested in this kind of violence. And that is why even today, people don't want to go back on it. People are making an issue of what has been said, what has been left out, this, that, blowing it out of proportion, reading things out of context, and then misdirecting people on it. But the point is, nobody's taking care to see the bigger picture that has been presented in the report. They don't, they tell you, we were very faithful in recording the evidence of these, the witnesses who came, and we've reproduced them verbatim in the report. Now, if anybody cares to go and look into it, they'll see, that there has been no discrimination. Whoever came and told us their story, we've recorded them. If there was something which we had edited, which they had said and which we had edited, or slanted it in our own way, we could take the blame. But here it is not like this. People are just talking about, talking, I think, more to fan some kind of further violence and so that there is no peace. This is the intent. Unfortunately, the people who are invested in Manipur are the ones who are invested in destroying it further.
Right. And I think also there is a very obvious sort of reason for that. Nobody wants to be critical of, what has happened. Nobody wants to reflect on what has happened in a way that everybody takes some blame. That's not been happening in Manipur.
People need to search their hearts.
The tragedy has been weaponized. This is a report, as you said, Greeshma. People are, without reading it, actually, we've seen instances, video grabs of saying that this should be taken back, this should be burnt, this should be publicly denounced. So
FIRs are being registered against, like in thousands, people want to register FIRs.
Yes, so it's an environment which is highly polarized and which is very sad. But all we wanted to show in this report was, and very quickly, as you said, it was said that the violence began on May 3rd, but we, in the testimonies that we heard and pieced together all the evidence which was available to us through various reports and all the testimonies, it was pretty clear that it was not a random mob violence, not random mob action, but organized attacks which were executed with precision. And enabled by access to arms, vehicles, and it was very well coordinated. We also can say that there were two groups which stood out in planning and executing this violence, which were Arambai Tengol and Maithili Poon. There is ample evidence which suggests that they were involved in the violence on that day. But also is very important to say that there was a groundwork which was being laid. When we say it was not spontaneous, what were the other things which were happening? And there were, we know that there was eviction of villages in the names of identifying, in the names of infiltrators, which was being said, we have to identify those infiltrators. So there was eviction, there was police going into villages, there was also marking of houses in urban areas which had happened, and a number of testimonies spoke to that. And there was also this question of reservations of jobs under 2005 notification, which was not being followed. So there were clearly built up to that, and the question of infiltration or illegal immigrants, which a drive which began in February, the narrative was so obvious. And the thing about this infiltrators, which was not only lay people were talking about, but the chief minister was saying the same thing. He was tweeting, making it an official line. That's also important to note, which we have all the tweets of Biren Singh.
Not just tweets, he actually would reply to Facebook accounts of individuals. He would respond to those accounts.
Yes, yes.
Specifically referring to cookies or people as illegal immigrants. No?
And after all this, when the report points it out, people protested this. The point is that it's all documented. We're not, we're not creating all this. All this information is already there online. And that is the only thing that has been reproduced in the report. So I don't understand why people are, like so aggrieved with the report. Unless, of course, it is for a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, that has been the nature of everything in Manipur from the time that I've started. I mean, everywhere you report, there will be a group that will not agree with what you're reporting. But in Manipur, there is no sort of perception of that. Reporting can also sort of take everything into account and produce a fair picture. But talking about being fair, I think we should go into the next part of the discussion, which is, chapters 4 to 7 have sort of gone into detail about how the events of violence happened, especially gender-based violence. And you've also sort of the major chunk of the report is tracing the causes, right? And sort of correlating it with how the role of the media cannot be completely dismissed in the causes that sort of push the violence into its next level, that is, make it static. The violence keeps continuing. So in this section, I just want to sort of go over how not just your findings about what the violence was like, but also like the events of the violence itself, specifically sexual based violence, and what you all thought from your findings were the primary causes of this violence.
Greeshma, we all know, and it is in the public domain, that there's something extremely disturbing about the brutality of violence in which people were killed, butchered, tortured, dismembered, disrobed, sexually assaulted in public, and then through social media displayed before the whole world what they were doing. Violence was valorized, and this brutal conflict, actually, we literally witnessed acts of violence because they were recorded on cameras and circulated by perpetrators. Torture, rape, killing by ordinary people of their next door neighbors. We saw violence by village defense forces, which was formed of ordinary laborers, farmers, villagers. We saw grabs of women who were paraded naked, men and the families killed. We cannot forget the 11th November 2024 violence, where 10 cookie insurgents were shot dead by the CRPF, which was in the public domain. And their autopsy reports revealed that eyes of 4 of the men were gouged. They were gouged. So the kind of violence we saw in Manipur was also unprecedented. And one was trying to make sense of what explains this hatred, and how did it come about, and how was it enabled? And we see that there is role of the missing state in all that. The report is not to actually make or say that one community did this and the others did not, but all So the failure all over. We know that as violence began on 3rd May, the armory was looted. Hundreds and thousands of weapons were looted while the state looked on. There were people who were talking about that they had a BSF camp next to their house, or they had this post next to their house, etc., and nobody came to their rescue while they were being attacked or burnt alive, lynched. Their houses were burnt, destroyed, women. The kind of brutality which happened was very, it was clear that there was no constitutional authority was absent. There was nothing was being done to stop. Why? When we know that 500,000, some 40, 50,000 armed forces are deployed in Manipur, and yet the armory is looted by a few men.
And also, there is no CCTV footage of the armories being looted. All of them have been wiped out.
And Manipur is the most militarized state of India.
Absolutely, and also this is no coincidence. So what we see is that the missing state, both central government and the state government, they did precious little to stop the violence, and violence continued, and everyone wondered why the government is not dismissed. There were MLAs from the state government who came and sat down in Delhi asking the high command, party high command, to dismiss the government because people had lost faith. So what had happened that people also lost faith in their elected representatives, in civic administrators, in army, in police, in paramilitary forces. So there was a kind of situation where people were left to defend themselves, where arms were played a major role in aggravating violence. So this is what was happening. Now there are complex reasons behind what was happening. What were the anxieties of the hill people when the marking or geotagging of the houses began, when they were began to be called infiltrators. We were in fact very surprised when we were visiting various Manipur places, also the camps, that the language used, the language which is very much used in Delhi by even our own Home Minister. The same language was being repeated in the camps, in Maiti camps, about cookies, that they are they've come, and also very derogatory words about these people, that they are not citizens. The whole thing about calling them infiltrators was to take away citizenship, the claim of Kuki people to their land, which was building up, and which came to a head when violence began. So there were earlier reports also about resources in the hill regions. There's also involvement of narcotic trade of various communities, not which were blamed on cookies, but our own work. And Anjana ji will speak to it, that there are bigger players in that trade also. So all of these very complex factors were coming into play in what was actually got played out, a human tragedy of a kind which we had not seen in the past, so to say.
Before we move on to the important question of narcotics, which I think we should discuss, the proliferation of people's militias, right? The Arambai Tengol calls itself a people's militia, though it is, I mean, in my reportage, in my profile of the Arambai Tengol, I called it the private army of the former Chief Minister Biren Singh. That's how I refer to them. But their presence and the way they grew from the time that the violence started is something that has been recorded in your report as well. So the absent state, openly people roaming around with weapons, threatening to annihilate and exterminate a community, and also sort of doing it without impunity. This question is something I think, like, wasn't it difficult?
The confidence wouldn't have come unless there was the state backing them. You see, that's the way they move. It is so evident when the way things happened. You could see, that it was a very one-sided game. The state never stepped in, and there was a reason for it.
So, when 4,000 firearms and large quantities of ammunition were looted from police armories in plain sight in two phases, May 3 and later, and then when just ahead of Mr. Shah's visit to the state, there was an appeal that please surrender or return all the weapons that were looted, only some 2,500 odd weapons were I think were returned, which were not only 80% of the total number of arms which were looted. And also to see when these radical groups, the militia and the private army of the state, as you Mr. Biren Singh, as you are calling them, the arrest of when their arrest was demanded, there was no such thing that was happening. When there's the example of Barish Sharma, the former president of the Manipur unit of Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha, is a case in point. There was clear evidence of him brandishing weapons or using violence, intimidating, looting, and he was accused of arms transfer and other violations, violent acts. But when he was arrested on October, I think 22nd, 2023, he was let out in no time. Like in a month's time, he was out again to do on bail to continue with what they were doing. So if we piece together these evidence, we find that there is a complete breakdown of legal, judicial, constitutional mechanisms. And our analysis in the report also shows, Greeshma, that justice was systematically denied. There was dissent was criminalized, and constitutional safeguards were ignored. And the result was a deep, widespread crisis of impunity, which is now so entrenched.
Justice Anjana, the same question, like, since you're from Bihar, this thing of people using weapons openly, right, and just brandishing them and getting away with it. I feel like I want your take on how is it that this kind of impunity comes. I mean, this is an unprecedented case again, because I have literally seen, these convoys of Arambai Tengol going about in Manipur in a way that even convoys of the security forces would you kind of stand aside to let them pass. So this is something I've never seen. And the question of narcotics, how that was sort of used to kind of mainstream a narrative of this community being drug lords, this and that, and whatever about the cookies, or to kind of criminalize them. If you can speak to both of these points.
Greeshma, the first thing that I'll tell you, there's a misconception, about Bihar. I mean, just because you see some stray pictures, of somebody brandishing a pistol doesn't mean that everybody in Bihar is doing it. In fact, on the contrary, I can't think of a situation that has happened in Manipur to be happening in Bihar. Who has a private militia in Bihar? There have been, lots of criminals there, but I've never seen anything so organized. You see, the whole purpose.
Back in the day, there were gangs that we have all read about from Bihar, I mean.
Gangs of Wasepur, you mean?
Not, I mean, like just gangs of politicians who used to be, like armed.
Nay, armed. See, having arms and being, moving around in a very, what do you say, in a very definite way, as though, the state patronage is there. That was very rare. That's very rare. This, you can't see, can you see an equivalent of what is happening in Manipur in any other state in India?
No, 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 of course not. Of course
You
not.
can't. This is one, one stray state where this is happening and it's being encouraged.
I mean, the chief minister has said that this organization is protecting Manipur. He has said that publicly.
Even now, when you see, the protests, when you talk about it, even talking about is some kind of a crime. Talking about it also entails an FIR against you. Now, this is strange, Obviously, it shows, that people in high powers are hand in gloves and they are protecting these people. Otherwise, you think they would have the courage to do it? They won't, Without the state patronage, nobody can do such a thing. And when we think in terms of Manipur, where there are all kinds of army, other Assam rifles, this, that, as we said, the most militarized state there, how could they not stop all this? It was the easiest thing for them to do. I mean, like ever since we've known, whenever there was some calamity, even if it was a natural calamity, the army would be pulled in, and the army would pulled in, and it would, control the situation for the simple reason that it was unbiased. The only reason was it was unbiased. What happened in Manipur? What stopped, the governments to act similarly? By past experience, this is what should have been done. And where, the narcotics bit is concerned, when we were taking testimonies, lots of people, they said, that people actually indulge, in petty, poppy cultivation, etc., for which they are paid. So they are not, the prime movers. And as it is, since I've been on the criminal side, I know that where narcotics is concerned, the drug lords are never caught, never hauled up. It is only these petty, people who are ferrying, little bits of things, who are exploited. Actually, it's more like an exploitation than anything else. You don't give them jobs, you don't give them security, you don't give them anything. What is the state's intervention in their welfare?
Right.
There is absolutely nothing. When you go give them no option, this is what you're going to be driven into. And then when they're driven into, what are you doing? Are you doing anything to rehabilitate them? That was the intent of NDPS is also that rehabilitation of drug peddlers, etc. All that is also not done. And actually, what they say, that the drug lords, they make big money in drugs. You think these small time villagers who are planting poppy, etc., they are big time businessmen? No. If they were, they would be very powerful. The very fact that they're not powerful means, that they're nothing in the food chain.
Also, your report refers to data about, NDPS also.
Actually, I was looking for that. I didn't really find it. But while we are going into this, how the state also discriminates, I was just looking into one government data. It is very interesting. The valley districts accounts for 9.97 of the state's geographical area and 60% of its population, whereas the hill districts account for around 90% of the state's geographical area and 40% of the population. But look at the funds, which come to the different parts of Manipur. And this is Manipur budget allocation. Okay. Between 2017 to 18 in crore, it was 4,982 crores for valley. And hills was 108 crores. 40% of your population is living in the hills. Don't forget this. In 2018 and 19, 4,715 crores, 150 for the hills. In 2019 to 20, 5,000 was the budget allocation, out of which 4,880 crores has been spent in the valley and 120 crores in the hills. In 22 to 21, it was 7,000 crores was the allocation, out of which 6,959 crores has gone into the valley and only 41 crores has come to the hills. Now, what do you talk about? What do you see, from this? Obviously, the state is not investing in its people. When you don't invest in its people, it's supposed to be a welfare state. You're supposed to look after people. And all that the people want is justice. Justice from the state, justice from the judiciary, justice from the civil society. And they're denied all of it.
And then the outrage.
The discrimination, it's a systemic discrimination. I'm reading, the data only from 17 to 21. I don't know about the present data, but this is the trend. If this is how you go on, you can't expect, anything more.
When people also speak about it, say that, we are not okay with this, there is an outrage, how is it that you treat that outrage and how do you criminalize it? That's also a question, right? Because
Exactly.
Amongst the reports that I did, right in the beginning of the violence, there was one case of a boy who was arrested on the 30th of April of 2023. He was arrested because he said that the state seems like, the chief minister and the state seems like they have no concern for the tribals. This was a 21-year-old boy, a first generation graduate from his family. He was arrested on the 30th. He got bail on the 2nd of May and he was re-arrested in another case. And he was being taken to jail on the 4th of May, which is when he was lynched to death. And this is just a young boy who just reshared a post on his Facebook account.
Greeshma, his mother deposed, and it was a very difficult testimony.
Anglal Mohan Vaipai, yeah.
It was extremely difficult to hear what she had to say, how he was treated, how he was abducted by the police that same night, and without the family knowing anything about where he was being kept, he was taken to Imphal. And the family learnt about it only the day after, and then they went and saw.
And evasion of the whole criminal justice system, he posted that status in Churchandpur. Why was he taken to Imphal?
Yes, and then he actually deleted it also.
Yeah.
But he was taken to Imphal, and then of course.
And there was a second, he got bail. He is re-arrested on the 2nd of May, and then he goes to court again on the 4th, for another bail. So I'm just saying that this is a thing which happened before the 3rd of May. And it was the fact that if you had seen that status, right, it was barely anything. That he was picked up for that, a 20-year-old kid was picked up for that and then had to die because he was in Imphal and not even his home district. That's the kind of evasion of the process, of the criminal justice system process as well, which I think...
No, very active. It's not an evasion. It's an active complicity with crime. It's not an evasion.
Yes, and he was, the IO was taking him when the IO, the investigating officer, was stopped by a mob and was asked to hand over the boy to them. And he had to do it, the IO.
Which is what the statement says, but nobody will ever know how he was killed.
Yeah, what really happened, actually.
I tried contacting the IO and all the IO told me is this is what happened. I'm like...
Everybody wants to just wash out that hand.
It happened on one of the main streets there. Why do you not have CCTV footage? How do we know what happened? But there was no answer to it.
Absolutely. It's the same way. And that's what the report, this testimony is included, how of his mother. And but it's not the only case. The case of two Kuki women were also, the mob asked the police to hand the two women to them. And that's what was done. And that's why the report talks about command responsibility for some of the crimes that have been committed over.
The presence of the police, the presence of security forces.
Yes.
Can we go over that a little bit? Like, how is it that, how can, when the scale of complicity is not really one or two cases, in almost In multiple cases, the police were present. When villages were being burnt down, police were present. Not just that, a complaint is filed by the family of the women who were raped and killed by the Waipai woman and the Kuki woman, one in the village in the island block and the other in Imphal. That complaint is filed in the middle of May, within 2 weeks, and the FIR is not registered till the video comes out. And it's only after the video comes out that all the cases of sexual violence see registration of FIR when a complaint has already been handed over to the police station in the hill districts. So complicity is not just that they were present. Complicity is also that even when they got the complaint, they refused to do anything about it. One. Second is the security forces. Even they were, even though they helped in moving people from one place to the other and getting them to safety, eventually over a period of time, they were also present when certain incidents were happening. How do we locate complicity where complicity is the norm? What do we do with it?
Complicity is a norm.
No, that's the state.
Is the norm.
It's not the complicity, it's the state.
Impunity, acting with impunity, unchallenged impunity. And I think this is what we would like to underline, and that the report has underlined, that there is complete impunity. All the processes where you see that how the state behaved, all the specific security forces, how ordinary citizens were left to mobs, to be lynched, raped.
If I'm not mistaken, 9,000 FIRs have been lodged. No one knows what has happened to those first information reports. Where is the investigation? Where is the logical process that you're supposed to follow? Where is the law? Naturally, people feel cheated, that even if we make a complaint, nothing happens on it. So who's listening? And who's supposed to be listening? It's the courts, it's the state. Because ultimately, when the case is filed, it's a criminal case, the state becomes the prosecutor. If the state chooses not to do or not to do anything or bring forward the case or take it any further, then the whole case collapses. And that's what's being done in 9,000 cases. This is the norm.
Justice Anjana, then who's going to hold the state accountable here?
According to me, it's the highest courts. They will have to step in and take stock of the situation and ask the state, ask the judiciary what has happened to these cases. Because ultimately, if the FIRs are filed, they would have gone to the court. What is the court doing about it?
Even on the cases of sexual violence, which the court was retired Justice Chandrachud, as he said, he was very worried, and he was also, when the case of two Kuki women happened, but also there is a Maiti woman who was raped, and she was also raped on third or fourth, I'm forgetting, but the case was lodged later, and nothing has happened in her case. So that's what we were told when we met other Maiti women, but that there were other women also who said that they were raped.
And that is why we've asked, for an SIT. At least, take up an independent investigation into those cases. Because, see, unless you broke those people, ultimately, in a court of law, nothing is going to... Because people who file cases, they're looking for justice from the courts. You're not giving them justice. So what is the state existing for? The state is for this, the judiciary is for this.
Is there a state apparatus at a...
All that they want to make out in Manipur is this, that there are infiltrators, people are coming from Myanmar, and it's a security-centric solution that they have to look for. That's about it. They don't think into long-term development of the state. Imagine, a state which has only one airport. I mean, how ridiculous can that be? And suppose if, it is, the difficult terrain obviously makes it burdensome for people to approach the courts. Why can't you have another branch? You can't have a bench of the court. The High Court, you can have a bench in the hills for those people. 40% of your population is living in the hills.
I think you all have been to Kangpopi and Churchandpur and maybe Saikul, which would have been difficult, but actually negotiating the hills, districts like Tamenglong, it's back-breaking, literally back-breaking. The infrastructure is so bad in the hill district that we can speak a lot about it, but coming back, so like while you were tracing the causes, everything that, both of you have mentioned, there is also a chapter that looks into the role of media, the narratives that were driven by media and the narratives that were initially only driven by the statements made by the CM's office. For 2 months, the only thing that the media was carrying till the video came out, till the video of the Vaipai woman came out, the only narrative that was coming were press statements of the chief minister, where he would randomly say 20 terrorists have been killed, 20 people have been, whatever. So what were your findings about the conduct of the media?
So you said it, but I mean, one, that media was polarized, but there was also this case of internet ban, which has become a very common tool in the hands of state in India. And in India, we are seeing right from Kashmir to any other conflict which happens. The first thing the state administration does is to stop bans internet, and that is actually is a very significant thing. It's not only that people are not able to communicate, but also allows only one kind of narrative to be built and pushed. So what you are mentioning about only chief ministers' statements, press statements being cited by the media, this happens because there is no other way of people posting the YouTubers or what's happening in the local areas where there is conflict, where there is curfew, where there is also violence happening on the streets, and people are have become IDPs. They are in camps. There is no way for them to speak, and there is no one to hear them. And there is only one and only one narrative which is being built. So that's what we found has happened in the role of media. Mainstream media is really, contributed to flaring up of conflict, contributed to polarizing opinions, contributed to how people perceive their own.
And also proliferation of disinformation.
Misinformation. And the whole of India was misled into believing something which was not there.
So something about this also needs to be called out, and media to be held to account for how it was reporting, but also what was enabling it. The ban, the suppression of voices, the criminalization of reporting, criminalization of independent media. So all of these things were weapons in state's arsenal, which they were using freely. And once again, this brings us back to the role of state, which turning out to be, as Anjana ji is saying, it's so partisan. It's so partisan that you can only I mean, there is you don't require any more evidence to show the role.
But here I think, it's the civil society also which has to stop accepting all this nonsense. We also have to stand up against this, you see. It is in our welfare to stop doing, stop accepting all this. Only then we can find a solution to all this. Otherwise, if we go on into this, burning the report because this is this and because that is, why believe? Why believe it unless, you've read it for yourself? You've satisfied yourself. Please read. And therefore, my request to your listeners is this, that please go through the report and see for yourself. Make an opinion for yourself. Form an opinion. Don't let others think for you. Don't let others decide for you. You have to stand up.
I mean, the same polarized reaction to the report also, and whereas we've reached a state of complete territorial demarcation with buffer zones, armed militia, and vigilante forces on both sides, and we do not see the division of the hearts and minds narrowing. Or do we? We don't. I mean, reaction to this report also.
And Navsharan, this despite the fact that everyone who came and gave testimony, they wanted peace and they wanted to go back and live, peaceably with their neighbors. All of them, not a single person, wanted to carry the blame any further. They looked for justice from the courts that something must be done with the FIR, etc. But they were not looking for punishment in the sense of lynching. They thought that this is the process that has to be followed, but that's about it. After that, the primary goal for them and primary concern was to go back to their homes and live peaceably as they did before. And this is, talking about both the communities. It is not only one person. Witness after witness, they came and they told us the same thing.
So that I think brings us to the last part of this conversation, which is, the solutions and what it is that you all have offered in terms of what's the path ahead. I think the first thing that we need to discuss here is the scale of displacement and the method and the form of displacement, right? It's I think the first time that a whole community cannot access the capital of a state, where all the major government offices are, where all the college, where all the good hospitals are, where all the, everything, even if you want to get something signed, like, a college certificate or something, everything is in Imphal and you can't access that place. Similarly, Meiteis who are in the hills have left their homes, but the scale of displacement is much higher amongst the Kuki-Do people. But what do you do when you can't access the capital of a state? So displacement, even after president's rule, which comes very, very late, the emphasis somehow has been on photo ops, like going to the hill and doing some festival and, return of weapons and open the highway. But what about people who cannot access the capital? Like, can you imagine, like, when I try to explain this to people, in Tamil Nadu, for instance, that you can't go to the airport of your state, they can't understand. They're like, what do you mean? Do you mean like there's no road? Do you mean that we've still not understood and sort of absorbed the fact that a group of people cannot go to the airport or cannot go to an office? So how do you sort of?
That's the ignorance of the rest of India. Their ignorance.
But that's also because, to a large extent, the state itself has denied it. They're like, you can come if you want to. I was hearing this while I was there, while I was in Manipur. Who's stopping them? The security forces would also tell me that we will support them if they want to come. It's a political situation, but there are conversations made like this. There are statements made like this. So while talking about solution, how do we address the problem of displacement? And also the fact that when we say divided state, it's literal.
It is a divided state, and I think the issue of displacement. What to expect when the Prime Minister very recently made a statement in the Parliament saying that, kind of normalcy is returning to the state of Manipur. And there is also a visit of the Prime Minister, which is being now talked about. But while almost 60,000 people are still in the camps, when they cannot access their own capital or they cannot access their homes, their fields. I mean, there were several people who came to give testimonies who said that they've lost their fields, their farms. They will never be able to go back to them, and they cried, they wept and wept over the loss of their land, which they are never going to get back. When this is the scale where about approximately 60,000 people are still in camps, and the center government says that normalcy is returning, I think there is a very big problem which is staring at us. If the people cannot go back to their own houses, their villages, when they do not have compensation. And there have been committees, we know Geeta Mittal committee, when they said, oh, compensation, it has been arbitrary, it should be streamlined, there should be domain experts to be brought in, etc. But there is, people don't have, there is no policy to settle people back in their homes, in their own communities. There's a complete division. Actually, when we went there, I recall that I think it was 60 kilometers from Imphal airport to Churachandpur, and we had to cross at least 7 checkpoints. And it was dark and it was raining, and we had to show our documents at every check post. This is when we had those documents. What about people, and they're never going to be able to, the incident of the 2 crew members of the Air India who died, one Cookie, one Maiti, and the body, the question came, can the Cookie body be brought to Imphal? I mean, it's shame on India if such a question is actually being asked. Can a dead body of a person be brought to her own state?
Where she's displaced from. She's actually from Imphal.
So absolutely. So there is this complete division. There is territorial demarcation, and nothing is being done to address that. It's only being shoved under the carpet. It's, as Anjana ji said, it's the people of Manipur, both Maiti and Kuki communities, who have to start talking about it and laying the foundations of peace. If they don't do it, it's not going to happen. It's not the displacement of this nature. Are people going to live in those camps forever? And when we visited those camps, we know how bad, inhuman the living conditions were, and how they were yearning to go back to their own villages and communities. So I think, it's almost 27 months to the conflict at now, and there is little headway in terms of return to normalcy for people who've lost their loved ones, who've lost livelihoods, who've lost everything, including...
You've lost faith. You've lost faith. Most importantly, you've lost faith.
Yes, so they've lost faith also. So in such a situation, what solutions do we say? And I think there are many things which this report talks about, and I'd ask Anjana ji to talk about it. But just one last thing to say, that there is a framework which this report suggests about going forward, and that is that there is no peace without accountability. Crimes have been committed by women and men. Crimes were abetted by someone in position of authority, and there was someone who was looking the other way. They were not abstract entities. Crimes were committed by people, and unless there is accountability, unless there is a question of responsibility, accountability, which is raised in the public domain, there's no chance of peace actually, or normalcy returning to Manipur.
Yeah, Justice Anjana, like no peace without justice, right? So
no peace without justice. No, but I would think, that the civil society and everyone has to start asking these difficult questions. How do we get back? Because everyone has to create an atmosphere of peace. Unless you feel comfortable, that you will not be lynched once again if you go back to your village home and you go back to your fields, you will not feel assured. You won't want to go back. So where does this assurance come from? That assurance has to come, from Manipuris themselves, the civil society, that come hail, come storm, we are going to protect each other for the welfare of the state. This is what has to, people have to be very firm on this. And they have to ask, the state difficult questions. They have to ask, where is the welfare state? Why is it absent? What is it supposed to do?
But that happening when the political justice or political solution that they're seeking is at loggerheads, right?
Grishma, there, I disagree slightly. I think, that unless the people themselves start doing something about it, nobody is going to answer. We have to ask questions. The state is never going to, because it's a very, people become very comfortable. It's nobody wants to come out of that comfort zone. For example, the past chief minister, he didn't want to abdicate his position because he was very comfortable as the chief minister. Probably the central government also wanted him, very comfortably there. So they didn't want to come out of that comfort zone. They finally he had to go. But what was the exact reason? Also, we don't know. Whether it was, the continuing burning of Manipur or what, we don't know. There could be so many other things, that could be the reason. So the point is that we have to be, we have to hold the system accountable for it. We have to say, what happened to my first information report? We have to ask the court, where did justice go? Why will I not get justice? I mean, like, these are the fundamental rights that have been given to us. Article 21 assures that. So what happened to it? And instead of that, we are fighting against each other, saying this one has been represented, that has not been overrepresented, this, that. I mean, these are minor issues. Forget it. The tenor of the report is this, that Manipur is crying for peace. It is crying to get back to normalcy. Can anybody deny that? And in whose interest is it to keep it burning? Please ask. What is it? Is there some vested interest somewhere to keep, the conflict on?
There's also a responsibility of the rest of India also, I would add
Of
to what
course, of
Anjana
course.
is saying, because as we have.
And right now, under the president's rule, obviously it's the central government which is supposed to act. There's no state government now.
And it's not just a regional tragedy, but it's a national conflict.
Yes, it's a national humanitarian crisis. We need to, confront this uncomfortable truth that this is a humanitarian crisis and it is not, and it is man-made.
Yes, yes. And
Nature has not done anything to it. It is man-made. As I showed, the state has to intervene and make sure that the citizens are well looked after. All of you traveled, in Manipur, and you know how difficult it is to travel from one place to the other. These are people from privileged classes. Think of the masses. So who's asking? Who's talking about this?
Nobody is, at least in India, rest of India, nobody is. In Manipur,
Oh, no. That's the tragedy, Grishma. That's the tragedy. And people indulging in all this theatrics of report burning and this and that. Why are you indulging in it? Why aren't you asking, what is it? What is the report? What has it said? Forget about communities. Each community suffered. And once, violence starts, it's very, very difficult to say, that who suffered more. Because, my violence, the infliction of violence may have caused another kind of trauma to me, another kind of trauma to somebody else. Can we compare two situations? We can't.
but the state is also like, Manipur is also like, because since you shared the data about how budgets are decided in Manipur, right? There is a majoritarian nature to that state, just like how there's a majoritarian nature to India right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So who's asking? Why the MPs who are going there, the MLAs who are sitting there, why aren't they asking these difficult questions? Why aren't they asking for more allocation? Why aren't they asking for more hospitals? Why aren't they asking for more offices in the hill areas? As you said, one certificate, you have to go to Imphal to get it signed. That's ridiculous, isn't it? We're talking about primitive times.
so that's where the demand actually, the cookies are demanding a separate administration like an autonomous council for their territory, and that Maiti is saying that territorial integrity of state cannot be compromised. It's only leading to further widening of the perception gaps, and also any means of coming closer for reconciliation. I think, as Anjana ji rightly said, unless the constitutional safeguards are restored, unless people are willing to see that building of restorative justice is in there.
And people must see the report that we have raised questions and we are looking for solutions. We've suggested those solutions. Look into the report, talk about that. Why talk about, the interest of one community over the other? Forget all that. It's all, everybody is a human being. My son's loss is equal to somebody else's son's loss.
True, but I think one way of ending this, I think, because I think we should discuss the strategies that you've mentioned at the end, no, which comprises all of this, but in a definitive sort of a way, there is the report does point to a bunch of stuff that can be done to kind of facilitate justice and peace. I think to wrap this up, if we could go over that.
Actually, our focus is also this, that there should be rehabilitation. Because there are 6,000 people probably still living in camps. And recently we heard, that all the camps will be now emptied out. But unless you give them, some alternative, unless you've created an atmosphere when they can go back, I mean, you just can't close down the camps. What has the state invested? What has the state done to create that ecosystem?
They have built up these prefabricated homes in very secluded parts of each district, and I've been to those places. They are not there is no access to water, there are no fields, there are no livelihoods. So what can you really do in these new places is a big question. But also recently,
Education has suffered, mental health has suffered.
also there was this recent RTI findings that came out about the huge amount of money that was given for rehabilitation and how most of that has been squandered by the state. Those RTI findings have recently come out, with respect to the money given for displacement.
And nobody's talking about that. They're talking about, burning the report. Why don't you talk about that?
There is some very little discussion about that, but that's the thing, right? Right from the beginning, what is wrong isn't being discussed as much as that community and this community is seeking the wrong things, or tainting. Like, the chief minister has resigned. Even after he has resigned, he continues to post tweets about illegal immigration and how he has been the leader of going against this. He still tweets and
Building up a narrative, yes, continuing the narrative that, that was started. That's what we couldn't understand, what the vested interest was. But there's something surely to keep Manipur burning.
we will probably know more about that in the lead up to the next elections, which is coming up very soon. But the report sort of concludes with this, with very elaborate directions of what all could be done. If we could just go over that briefly so that we can wrap up our conversation with that.
Actually, the report is very well discussed that there have been similar kind of instances in other parts of the country, of the world. And the way, it has been dealt with in other countries, that formula, whatever, the same thing can be copied here. We can also do the same thing. We can, see, peace talks are very essential between the communities. But instead of having peace talks, that's the recommendation. What you do is you're trying to create a further rift by blaming the other.
But how will the peace talks happen, Justice Anjana, when the communities are like, there is like, when you go to Manipur, you'll know that there's not been a single meeting of the stakeholders of this, of the leadership itself, right? So and I feel like the main reason for that is also that the MHA has been speaking to groups separately, has even speaks to groups like the Arambai Tengol, even speaks to groups that are, have openly paraded with weapons or have attacked members of security forces. So when the Ministry of Home Affairs or the Home Minister itself kind of validates the existence of players who have proliferated violence, then how will you get common people? Like, do the common people have any power?
Common people will not have any power unless there's a, I mean, they seek that power, one, and there is a concerted effort by the state to actually empower citizens so as allow them to rebuild lives which have been shattered. So, in that,
State has only supported weaponization and given power to groups that have.
Empowered doesn't mean, power of the gun.
no, so that's where we say that there are, as Anjana ji was saying, that there are global peace building models, and those should be evoked. And the framework for justice and reconciliation, which this report also, our report talks about, is granting constitutional safeguards, restorative justice, and urgent legal accountability fixing, which includes independent investigations, SIT, as was mentioned earlier, long term peace strategies, which include stakeholders based dialogue, making space for that, opening up space and not doing behind the scene negotiations with armed groups, but opening it up. And women, as one of the chapters in the report on gender suggests, that women have, Manipuri women have been very active, very vocal. They have a history of contributing to social political processes. They should be invoked, actually brought back those ways of discussions of broaching peace. I mean, when we were meeting Myra Paibis, and we talked about why did they not speak when some Maiti men were allegedly raping Kuki women? And they said, no, we did. We did speak about it. We did ask them not to do. We did shelter the women. We did bring shawls to cover women if they were being paraded. So there is, you have to see the openings where they exist. Somebody has to see that and make space for dialogue. Dialogue is the only way in which a difficult peace will have to be initiated. It's a very difficult thing but someone has to start. And that's where the hope lies, that people wanting to return home, ordinary people want their livelihoods back, they want their lives back, they want to send their little children to school, they want to make a living, and they want to live peacefully. So if that's the sentiment, if that's something which they want, of course, there is hope, there is ground which needs to be then built up, funneled up. This sentiment of people wanting to return, wanting to live peacefully should be funneled up, and it becomes everyone's responsibility, ours, yours, and equally Manipuri people, to start the process.
See, the other countries that I was talking about, in South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which emphasized truth-telling, amnesty in exchange for confession, and national healing. In Rwanda, they had the Zakasa Court for Community-Based Justice Post-Genocide. In Northern Ireland, they had the Good Friday Agreement that institutionalized shared governance and power devolution. In Colombia, transitional justice processes for FARC militants emphasizing victim participation and land restitution. In Bosnia, role of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in post-conflict accountability. So all this can be done, we can replicate this formula in our state as well. We can do it. And then, there are, we've given some long-term suggestions also. For example, there has to be a dialogue and trust building. So we've said that there should be an establishment of multi-tiered platforms for intra-group, intergroup, and state-level discussions. So there people speak out, they talk about their woes, they talk about the difficulties, and find the solutions as well. So all this, needs active participation of the state. The point is that who is trying to make the general people aware that this can also be a solution? No one. They're talking about about the report in such a negative way. Nobody is talking about these good things that have been said in the report, the suggestions that have been made. Why can't they be done? What is so difficult in this?
I think with the lack of general will and also political will to sort of go towards something like this is
We have to have a lot of will, to push this through. And at every level. There must be a dialogue. As Navsharan said, that unless, you have to start with a dialogue. And only then, the solutions will come up. And as you said, that for you to travel to, from such and such place to Imphal was so difficult. I mean, that's your personal knowledge. You shared it with your Tamil Nadu friends, and they said that how is it possible that you don't go? So this is the kind of the dialogue that is required. And this dialogue, I think, is required not only within Manipur, but also pan-India. People need to come out with these stories that these are the difficulties and they are not located, in that region alone.
in the hope that that happens and this report is read more and discussed more. I'll just bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much, Justice Anjana ji and Dr. Navsharan, for speaking to me. Thank you so much.
I hope peace prevails in Manipur.